Hello, everyone. We'll be looking at the 2018 ZAT paper today, the verbal section. So, we're starting itself with a reading comprehension passage. This particular passage might seem a little complex or abstract, but it actually is not that difficult. So, this passage is about history, and as the very first sentence says, why history should be studied, right? So, the author discusses throughout the course of the passage why history should be studied. He says, with science, there is an expectation that there will be predictions that are made based on the facts and things like that. He says, similarly, historians, okay, in this line, he says that similarly, historians are asked to examine the actions of our ancestors so that we can repeat their wise decisions and avoid their mistakes, right? So that is commonly held to be the purpose of studying history. All right, but the author has a different opinion. He says, but it never works like that, right? He says it's that's not the idea, right? So the discussion is of how studying history will help us, and the conclusion that the author more or less comes to is that studying history gives us options. It makes us aware of the things that are available to us, maybe the opportunities, maybe the ways ahead, etc., etc. Right? So that's how the author ends by telling us studying history will not tell us what to choose, but at least it gives us more options, right? So it opens the way for us. So that's what this passage is about. Now, the first question says, based on the passage, which of the following options would be the most appropriate for citizens to learn history, right? So, in order to learn history, what would be the most appropriate? Yes, so I'm just going to refer you back to these lines again. Similarly, historians are asked to examine the actions so that we can repeat actions of our ancestors, so that we can repeat their wise decisions and avoid their mistakes. But it never works like that, because the present, okay, this is where he says that the present is just too different from the past. It is a waste of time to study Hannibal's tactics in the Second Punic War so as to copy them in the Third World War, right? He says there's no point in copying the old world tactics of war in a later war, because it's not the same kind of battle. Looking at that, right? So, what is necessary? So, he also talks about the study of history here. The study of history aims, above all, to make us aware of possibilities we don't normally consider. Okay, so this is the point that the author makes, right? So, what would be the most appropriate for citizens to learn history? Let's take a look at the options. British names of streets in India should not be changed, right? Now, it's not about whether something should be changed or not. Yes, that's not what the author is saying. He's talking about studying history as it is, right? So, whether it should be changed or not, we don't, right? There's no information in that. The same goes for option 3, which says British names of streets in India should be changed to Indian names along with an explanation of their history. This is too specific, right? Based on this passage, which is talking about the study of history, we cannot infer that it is necessary for the street names to be changed to that to Indian names, a specific context along with it. Now, the explanation of their history might still go along with the passage. Yes, but whether it should be changed specifically to a particular thing, we don't know, because the passage doesn't tell us that. Yes, names of Indian streets should be based on suggestions generated through an opinion poll. Again, way beyond the scope of this passage. And names of Indian streets should be periodically changed. Again, goes more or less along the same lines as 1 and 3, where it's talking about a change. Yes. So if you look at option 2, which is the answer, right, it says every street in India should display a plaque. So right there, along with the name of the street as it is, there should be a plaque that lists all its previous names, right? So, why do we study history? Because we learn what has come before, and that makes us consider possibilities we have not considered before, and it gives us options, right? Which is what the author says. So that's what goal is most appropriate for citizens to learn history. Which of the following options is the closest to the essence of the passage? Okay, so if you look at the lines that I had pointed out, what is normally considered the purpose of studying history, right? And where he says, but it never works. And then you look at the last two, three sentences. I'm marking this again because I had pointed this out. All right. Now you can actually look at it from here also. Studying history aims to loosen the grip of the past, right? So if the past is something that, he says at one point, he says the past holds us by the neck and guides us in a certain, like makes us look in a certain direction or look towards the future, right? So he says studying history aims to loosen the grip of the past. It enables us to turn our head this way and that and begin to notice possibilities our ancestors could not even imagine or didn't want us to imagine. So it could be either way. Yes. By observing the accidental chain of events that led us here, we realize how our very thoughts and dreams took shape, and we can begin to think and dream differently. All right. So studying history will not tell us what to choose, but at least it gives us more options. Yes. So when you look at these words, right, you can directly go to option 5. As you go through the options, you'll see the word eclectic. Okay. Eclectic is something that is made up of things taken from various sources. And that's essentially what history gives us. It gives us various sources and makes us aware of the possibilities. Yes, so that's the answer. So it doesn't say, the author doesn't say that history does not help to predict future, but he says that's not the real purpose of studying history. Yes, history deals with long time periods, is not something that is dealt with in the passage. History documents the past events related to specific people, not mentioned in the passage, and there is no strict cause and effect relationship in history, is again something that is not relevant to this particular passage. This is not something that the author discusses. We have here a slightly different type of question. There are 3 statements given, and the question asks us which of the statements above would contradict the view of the author. Okay, so the first one says a historian successfully predicted a political crisis based on similar events of the last century. Okay, so please take note of these words. He successfully predicted, okay, based on what? Similar events of the last century. Now, if you look at the example of Hannibal that is given by the author, right? That, the idea is to study the ancestors so that we can repeat their wise decisions and avoid their mistakes. And he says it doesn't work like that, because studying Hannibal's tactics in order to apply them to the Third World War, that doesn't really apply, because there are no longer cavalry battles. Cavalry is men riding on horseback, right? So soldiers riding on horseback. So it doesn't work that way, is what the author says. Yes. So if a historian successfully predicted a political crisis based on similar events of the last century, then it's a direct contradiction of what the author is saying. So statement 1 is definitely something that contradicts the view of the author. Okay, so you can eliminate options 2, 3, right? You're left with 1, 4, and 5 still, because you have that. So let's take a look at option 2. Okay, using the latest technology, doctors could decipher the microbe causing the disease. This is irrelevant because it has nothing to do with history. It's talking about using the latest technology. Yeah, so this has nothing to do with contradicting the view of the author. It doesn't help us at all. So you can eliminate option 1 and you can eliminate option 5. You'll anyway get the answer option 4, 1 and 4 only. So let's look at statement 4. A tribe in the Andaman learns to predict epidemic outbreaks by listening to the stories of how their ancestors predicted the past outbreaks. So again, they're basing their prediction on something that happened in the past. Yes, so this is again something that would contradict the view of the author. Statement 3 again says students who prepared for an examination by perusing 10 years question papers did not do well. If they didn't do well, then that goes along with what the author is saying, because the author says it doesn't necessarily help, right? So that's why statements 1 and 4 will be the answer. We have here another passage. This passage will probably make for slightly more difficult reading for some people, at least. If you have an interest in philosophy, if you're familiar with Descartes, right, then maybe you would enjoy it, right? But again, the purpose here is not whether you not to really enjoy it. The purpose is at the end of the day to be able to answer the question. So that way, if you look at it, if you don't get lost in the details and if you don't get confused by the repetition of certain words, right, then yes, this passage is again doable, I would say. This passage is about Peirce's views, though starts by mentioning Descartes. It actually is talking about another philosopher, Peirce, and his views on doubt and belief, right? So he talks about the connection or the relationship between doubt and belief, right? So it starts out by mentioning Descartes, who's another famous philosopher, yes. Actually, it is his work or his statement that provides the context for Peirce's title, How to Make Our Ideas Clear, right? So that's how it starts, yes. But essentially, the passage is about doubt and belief, yes. Now, if you look at the first sentence of the second paragraph, right, because essentially the passage conveys its main idea in the second paragraph, right, where it says beliefs and doubts are distinct. They are separate from each other. All right. The author goes on to talk about what belief is and what doubt is. So essentially, what the author says is that a doubt implies a certain state of uncertainty, right? We are not sure of something, we are uncertain of something. That then causes us to answer questions, and once we get the answers to that questions, that can become a belief, meaning it becomes certainty, it becomes something that we are more clear about. All right. And because of that, we take action. Yes. So doubt, it starts with doubt, and we can overcome it and let it lead to belief, and therefore thereby take action. All right. So according to Peirce, for a particular thought, which of the following statements will be correct? Yes. So the answer to this is option 5. All right. A doubt may lead to a belief. Okay. If you look at options 1 and 2, you have a red flag there, right? Basically, always. Yes. Now, when a particular option in RC uses always, never, be very careful about picking such an option. I'm not saying it can't be the answer, but it can be the answer only if the passage is also that definite. Okay. So a belief always leads to a doubt always leads to a belief. Very, very definitive as per this, too definitive for this passage. Okay. A doubt and a belief may coexist. No, it's not just that they coexist, it's more that one, the doubt could lead or may lead to a belief. Yes, a belief and a doubt are not related, is definitely not, contradicting the passage. Yes. So you more or less get your answer from here. We overcome this doubt and fix a belief by getting the directions. Yes, so you can start from here. A common example of a doubt would be arriving in a familiar city and not being sure of the location of our destination, not being sure of the location of our destination address in relation to our present location. We overcome this doubt and fix a belief by getting the directions. Once we achieve a belief, we can take the necessary action to reach our destination. Okay. Peirce defines a belief subjectively as something of which we are aware and which appeases the doubt. So this is where we get this answer from. Here we have a statement: a candidate has applied for ZAT. According to Peirce, it indicates that. Yes. So if a candidate has applied, what is applied, has applied, it's an action, right? That means the student or the candidate has taken the action. All right. So according to Peirce, so we are basically going back to the same thing that we looked at earlier, right? How we start with a doubt and how we could overcome that doubt, and ultimately it leads to action. Yes. So if a candidate has applied for the ZAT, it means the person has taken action. All right. That means somewhere or the other, there has to be a belief before this. Yes. So we get our answer in the form of option 1, which says the candidate has a belief in the ZAT application process. Yes. So it would have started with maybe uncertainty, not knowing what it is. Yes. Not knowing what the ZAT is. then that leads to a question in our mind. What is the zat? How do I go about applying for it? What do I do with it? Yes. So that would lead to the belief. Yes. And once the belief has come, right, once the belief has been achieved, then there is action that is taken, which is applying for the zat. Okay. None of the others. Again, the candidate has a belief. Yes, it uses the words has a belief, but it's a trap, that the zat is a good test of ability. This is taking it too far. Yes, we don't know about the good or bad yet, right? It is basically about the information. All right, that's the idea. The candidate is doubtful about his or her performance. Yes, so if the doubt is there, it has not yet led to belief, right? Otherwise, the candidate would not have applied. Okay, the candidate believes that he or she will perform well. Okay, so this might seem like, I would say this is probably the next closest option, but again, because it says perform well, we haven't yet gotten to that, because that's again a doubt that should lead to a belief and then to action. Yes, and the candidate has a doubt about his or her performance. So this is similar to option 3. If there is a doubt, it has not yet led to belief, and therefore would not have led to action. We have a vocabulary based question here. Which of the following words is closest in meaning to dilettantism? Okay, so what is that word? Pierce acknowledges, okay, that some people like to think about things or argue about them without caring to find a true belief, but he asserts that such dilettantism does not constitute thought. They like to think about things or argue about them without caring to find a true belief. What does true belief mean? Finding answers to it, right? So in that case, if the person has not really found answers to it, and the person claims that he or she has thought about it and likes to argue about it, Pierce argues that that's dilettantism and that doesn't involve thought. Yes. So which one would be the closest in meaning? If it doesn't involve thought, that means it is, so belief and doubt are there as trap options, right? That's it can't be that he has a belief, it can't be that he has a doubt, right? It is more that he's taken a guess because he has not bothered to find true answers. Surety doesn't apply in this case, it's the opposite. And unlikelihood is just more that something is not a possibility, right? So that doesn't fit in here. We have another question based on this. A person thinks that he or she has to keep awake for 20 hours, keep awake for 20 hours in a day to score well in the examination, but is awake for only 15 hours. For the above statement, which of the following options will be right according to Pierce? Okay, so the person thinks, okay, mind you, look at the word, thinks that he or she has to keep awake for 20 hours, but is awake only for 15 hours, right? Meaning the action is not taken, right? Has a certain thought, but there is no action taken on that thought. Therefore, it means basically that the person doesn't have a true belief. Yes, because what, according to Pierce, what happens when a person has an actual belief, has a true belief? It leads to action, right? So if it's a true belief that he or she needs to keep awake for 20 hours in order to do well, the person would keep awake for 20 hours and not for 15 hours. Okay, we have here another passage. While the passage might seem a little abstract, the questions are actually fairly straightforward. So you'd get to them at least through elimination, right? You can break it down to a certain extent. It is sometimes said that consciousness is a mystery in the sense that we have no idea what it is. So the author is talking about consciousness. He introduces something called the hard problem of consciousness. Okay, so that is essentially what the author is talking about, what he calls the hard problem of consciousness, which is that it cannot be, or how it can be solved or explained, right? So he says it cannot really be explained in purely physical terms, right? And he uses the example, or rather he uses the reference of Galileo, who was another person who tried to explain it. And Galileo explained it as he says here, right, in the third paragraph. Galileo's solution was to strip matter of its sensory qualities and put them in the soul, or as we may put it, in the mind, right? So he says that's how Galileo tried to explain it. Yes, but he says, but of course, Galileo didn't deny the existence of the sensory qualities. Okay, if Galileo were to time travel to the present day and be told that scientific materialists are having a problem explaining consciousness in purely physical terms, he would no doubt reply, of course they do. I created physical science by taking consciousness out of the physical world. So he separated consciousness from the physicality. Right? That's how Galileo tried to explain it. And that's essentially what the author discusses in this particular passage, what he calls the hard problem of consciousness, right? He's of course quoting somebody when he calls it that, David Chalmers. Yes, but that's what the author discusses. Yes, so there are scientific materialists or materialists who hope that we will one day be able to explain consciousness in purely physical terms. Yes, mind you, consciousness is generally held to be a state of mind, right? But it is a mystery. The second paragraph essentially talks about how modern techniques talk about the physical processes again. But again, it doesn't really talk about the correlation between the physical processes and consciousness. Okay, so what is the essence of the passage? Yes, we'll work backwards from this. The answer to this is option 2. The hard problem cannot be solved by materialists. Yes, and that's essentially what we just discussed. It's mostly in the third paragraph. So it says, the first sentence says that materialists hope that one day we will be able to explain consciousness in purely physical terms. The problem with materialist approaches to the hard problem is that they always end up avoiding the issue. Okay, by redefining what we mean by consciousness. Okay, so basically it's an avoidance. They try to redefine what we mean by consciousness. They start off by declaring they're going to solve the hard problem to explain experience, but somewhere along the way they start using the word consciousness to refer not to experience but to some complex behavioral functioning associated with experience. Yes, so experience, consciousness sort of used interchangeably, right? And the idea is at some point they start to explain, or they try to explain consciousness by talking about some complex behavioral functioning associated with experience, such as the ability of a person to monitor their internal states or to process information about the environment, right? They try to explain consciousness in those terms. Yes, explaining complex behaviors is an important scientific endeavor, but the hard problem of consciousness cannot be solved by changing the subject. Yes, so he says that in the end what happens is, they are just changing the subject, they're just bringing something else in. So he says it cannot be solved that way. All right, and then you refer to the last paragraph also. So from here also you will get Galileo is the one who is held to have solved this problem, but he found a way around it too, right? Basically what he also did was change the subject to a certain extent. Yes, so he says, I created physical science by taking consciousness out of the physical world, right? So the hard problem, the essence of the passage is that the hard problem cannot be solved by materialists who want to make it very physical. Then, which of the following options would most likely be an example of the hard problem? All right, there is also a reference here to the sentence, yes, that I created physical science by taking consciousness out of the physical world. Yes, so that sentence is also mentioned in this question actually. All right, so here what do you have? If the hard problem is that, well, basically why do materialists find it difficult to explain consciousness? Because they are trying to bring in the physicality. Okay, so that way you can straight away eliminate options one. Yes, physicality, basically some sort of feeling. Yes, experience, some sort of experience. So you have feeling the heat, okay, which is an experience. Okay, you have experiencing joy, which is also an experience. And what makes us tired? Yes, so this is also an experience. So straight away these three options can be eliminated because they are all experiences. Yes, so they are not the hard problem, which is essentially that it cannot be explained. Yes, what is it? Why do we have feelings? That is the problem, right? Not what feeling do we have, not what experience have we had, why do we have it, right? That is the question. Okay, why we prostrate? So yes, option 4 starts with a Y, so does option 5, but option 4 says why we prostrate. Prostrate is kneel down. Yes, kneel down and touch our heads, bend down and touch our heads, which is again physicality. It is bringing in a certain physicality. Okay, on the other hand, when you say why do humans take birth, mind you, they're not saying how. Okay, they're not saying what, they're saying why. What is the reason for humans to take birth? Okay, so this is an example of a hard problem which cannot be explained through the physicality. So this is a tough question to do, right? So if you do not understand it, if it is difficult to figure out, right, I would still say question 8 can be done, right? If you focus on certain keywords, right, understand, yes, especially when you come to the end of the second paragraph, you'll see that the third and the fourth paragraphs are basically talking about the hard problem. So the essence of the passage can be answered. Yes, but question 9 will be a little more difficult to answer. Then you have question 10, which of the following statements can be inferred from the passage? What do we have here? The passage argues that science could uncover all mysteries of the world. So just like always, as I mentioned earlier, unless the passage itself very clearly says all mysteries, we cannot take an option that says all mysteries. Okay. The same mistake has been made by option 2. The passage argues that science could uncover all mysteries by giving alternative explanations. It's just adding another few words there which are not relevant to the passage. Okay, the passage argues that science could never uncover, again, yeah, an extreme option. It doesn't all that to never uncover all the mysteries. Yes, so all the mysteries are not dealt with. The passage specifically talks about the hard problem of consciousness. Yes, now option 4 says the passage argues that science and consciousness are two different domains. Yes, so this is our answer. Let's just eliminate 5. The passage argues that nature is so mysterious that humans are not even aware of the phenomena is way beyond the scope of this passage, right? There's no discussion, at least not a detailed discussion of nature. If anything, it would only be mentioned in order to make a point about consciousness. Whatever else is discussed in connection with consciousness. Okay, so when the author talks about science, yes, or rather the author talks about it in terms of materialistic or materialists, yes, who are using modern brain imaging techniques, right, who are trying to explain consciousness in purely physical terms, right? There is the reference to Galileo also, who took the physical out of the the consciousness, yes, or he took consciousness, he removed it from the physical world. Yes, that's the idea. So the basic reference or the basic essence, the point that the author tries to make is that science and consciousness are two different domains. All right. Right. This passage should definitely be attempted. Yes. It's short, it's straightforward, right? And makes the point very clear. It discusses the relationship between labor and capital, right? Yes, there is detail here, right? And if you get lost in the detail, please remember, detail is something that you don't need to remember. You just need to know what word is where, right? So that when there is a keyword, you can go back to that specific part of the passage, read at that point and get the detail, get the information. What you need is the essence of the passage. And the essence of the passage is the relationship between labor and capital, right? The author starts by saying labor and capital are the opposite poles of capitalist society. Okay, the very first sentence says that. And then he goes on to give us various detail. As I said, the discussion of that. He tells us what labor is. He also makes the point that labor is something that is exploited, right? And why it is exploited because of its relationship with capital. The first question says, while labor is capital, it is poles apart from each other because. Okay, so why is it that they are poles apart from each other? If you look at the last few sentences, you'll actually get your answer, though of course he says this polarity begins in each enterprise in the second sentence. Okay, but you read the last 2-3 sentences and you'll get your answer. But so the previous sentence says the working class lives in a social and political existence of its own outside the direct grip of capital. Okay, it's not directly in the grip of capital. It protests and submits, rebels, or is integrated into bourgeois society. Bourgeois is the common, right? Society sees itself as a class or loses sight of its own existence in accordance with the forces that act upon it. Okay, in accordance with the forces that act upon it and the moods, conjunctures, and conflicts of social and political life. But since in its permanent existence, it is the living part of capital, okay, its occupational structure, modes of work, and distribution through the industries of society are determined by the ongoing, okay, by the ongoing processes of the accumulation of capital. It is seized, released, flung into various parts of the social machinery and expelled by others, not in accord with its own will or self activity, but in accord with the movement of capital. Okay, so the last few lines essentially tell us why labor is capital, right? It's part of it. Okay, but at the same time, they are completely different from each other. Why? Okay, so as such, when you look at it, labor might seem to be outside the direct grip of capital, but he says, in its permanent existence, it's a living part of capital because it's the active. What is labor? Made up of people who are working, right? So what happens? The way it is structured, the way it works, right? Not it. It is just a reference to labor, basically the people. Okay, the distribution of labor, they're all determined by the ongoing processes of the accumulation of capital, right? So it is seized, so it is taken, it is released, it is thrown or distributed into various parts of society and social machinery in whichever way, right? It is thrown out of others, not by its own will, right? It cannot decide for itself, right? Is the idea. So when what do you get from that? Now when you say labor does not have a will of its own, it's a trap option. Don't fall for it. It's not saying that it does not have a will of its own. It's more that it is, so mind you, this is how you can eliminate option 1. Not in accord with its own will or self activity, but in accord with the movement of capital, right? So basically the reference is that the will of capital, okay, is stronger, right? So it overpowers the will of labor, right? So it's not that labor doesn't have its own will, it's more that the will of capital is strong, right? That's the idea. Okay, so according to the passage, what does the working class subsist on? Okay, what does it subsist is nothing but exist. Okay, so what does it manage on? What does it exist on? Now this is where you get the answer. That portion of money capital which is set aside for the payment of labor, the portion which in each cycle is converted into living labor power is the portion of capital which stands for and corresponds to the working population, okay, and upon which the latter subsists. Yes, so when the question says according to the passage, it generally is something that is stated in the passage. Okay, it may not be in the exact same words as the option. In fact, it generally is not, but the information is very clearly stated. Okay, so what do you get from this? It is basically, right, so the portion of money capital which is set aside for the payment of labor, right? What is payment of labor? Nothing but wages. It is not the living labor. It is not living labor doesn't subsist on living labor. Labor doesn't subsist on the benevolence, kindness, or generosity of bourgeois society. It's not capital which is the same as labor. The labor which is performed in the past is irrelevant. Yes, so it is option 5. Living labor purchased. Yes, purchased meaning the labor is paid by the capital. Which of the following statements will be true according to the passage? So the answer to this is option 4. Okay, the pursuit of capital accumulation results in the exploitation of the working class. Okay, you get this answer from here. So it starts from here, okay, which talked about the previous lines, the lines that we referred to for the previous question, right? That they subsist, they exist on the wages. And then it goes on to say, before it is anything else, therefore, the working class is the animate is living part of capital, the part which will set in motion the process that yields to the total capital its increment of surplus value. As such, okay, mind you, this is where you get your answer from. The working class is first of all raw material for exploitation. Okay, so because capital accumulation is pursued, right? What happens because of that? There is exploitation of the working class. All right, that's the answer. Right, we have here a parajumble based question. Yes, 5 sentences to be put in order. Let's take a look at the sentences. But its most advanced formulation is called superstring theory, right? So it starts with a but. So maybe there's a better sentence to start with. However, so again, not a good starting sentence. Scientifically, the hyperspace theory goes by the names of Kaluza-Klein theory and supergravity. So here we have a possible introductory sentence. The usual 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time are now extended by 6 more spatial dimensions. We could start with sentence 4 also, but then we don't have a single option that starts with sentence 4, so we can eliminate that. Okay. And we caution that the theory of hyperspace has not yet been experimentally confirmed. So yes, since the theory of hyperspace is mentioned in sentence 3, right? So we start with sentence 3. Let's see what should follow sentence 3. Scientifically, the hyperspace theory goes by the names of Kaluza-Klein theory and supergravity, right? But its most advanced formulation is called superstring theory, right? So scientifically, it goes by a certain by certain names, but its advanced formulation has another name. So 3 should be followed by 1. Okay, but we still have 2 options to deal with there, options 1 and 4. So let's see what follows 1. Okay, this is followed by sentence 4, which says the usuals, right? Because sentence 1 says which even predicts the precise number of dimensions. Okay, so sentence 4 says the usual 3 dimensions of space. Okay, so we have 3, 1, 4, followed by 5, which says we caution that the theory of hyperspace has not yet been experimentally confirmed, followed by 2, which says, however, the theory has already swept across. Yes, it has not yet been experimentally confirmed, but it has already swept across the major physics research laboratories. Okay, so option 1 is the best choice. We have another parajumble question. Yes, both these are fairly straightforward, right? So quite easy to do. Definitely something that you should attempt, right? So let's take a look at it. We have here 5 sentences again. It is less appealing but more morally urgent to understand the actions of the perpetrators. While this does seem like a possible introductory sentence, it says the perpetrators, so maybe there is a reference. Okay, it is easy to sanctify policies or identities by the death of the victims. Okay, so again, it is saying the deaths of the victims. Okay, statement 3 says the victims were people. A true identification with them would involve grasping their lives rather than grasping at their deaths. Okay, the moral danger, after all, is never that one might become a victim, but that one might be a perpetrator or a bystander. Okay, by definition, the victims are dead and unable to defend themselves from the use. Okay, so the most general sentence in this set will be sentence 3. The victims were people. A true identification with them would involve, right, in order to really understand them, it would involve grasping their lives rather than grasping at their deaths. Okay, meaning trying to understand their lives rather than just trying to understand their deaths. Okay, so that gives us the context for that. This is followed by sentence 5, which says, by definition, the victims are dead and unable to defend themselves from the use that others make of their deaths. Okay, so 3 should be followed by 5, and that actually gives us option 3 as the answer. Right, so if you can establish that connection, or if you can establish now, sentence 2 says it is easy to sanctify policies or identities by the deaths of victims. It is less appealing but morally more urgent to understand the actions of the perpetrator. So actually, if you look at it, there is a connection between 2 and 1. And I think that connection is also not there in any other option, right? So if you make either the 3-5 connection or the 2-1 connection, you can answer this question. Okay, right. We have here a critical reasoning logic based question. Okay, so which of the following options is the most likely explanation of Aarti's decision? So what is Aarti's decision? Aarti's decision is that she applied to college X rather than college Y. What information do we have? We know that Aarti researched the mission statements of various colleges, right? So she's planning for higher studies. So what did she do? She researched the mission statements of various colleges and discovered that College X, a small private college with a fee of 8 lakhs per year, was dedicated to producing compassionate, okay, so was dedicated to producing compassionate and curious leaders. College Y, okay, what is College Y? A large institute. Mind you, these are the differences. Okay, College X is a small private college. The fees were 8 lakhs per year. It was dedicated to producing compassionate and curious leaders. College Y is a large institute. Okay, fee of 9 lakhs per year, promoted itself as a leading research facility. Now, Aarti decided to apply to X rather than Y. Okay, so what is the most likely explanation? What would explain her decision? One says a direct relationship exists between a college's cost and the quality of education it provides. Okay, this would not explain it because they have two different mission statements. There's nothing about the quality of education. Students apply to smaller colleges that offer more personalized attention from professors. Again, we know College X is a smaller one, but whether it provides personalized attention, we don't. A large research university cannot prepare students for career as a non-profit executive. This is taking it beyond the scope of the passage. Okay, students apply to colleges with mission statements that align with their goals. Okay, so we know Aarti is planning for higher studies. This is one thing I didn't point out. Her future goals include working as a manager of a non-profit organization designed to provide assistance to underrepresented populations. Okay, so X was dedicated to producing compassionate and curious leaders. Yes, so in that case, if her goal includes working as a manager of a non-profit organization designed to provide assistance to underrepresented populations, compassionate and curious, yes, goals along with that. So yes, students applying to colleges with mission statements that align with their goals would be an explanation of her decision. Okay, so 5 is talking about the best colleges having the best mission statements. How can we decide which one is best? Right? There's no basis on which we can decide which is the best. Right. So we have here a sentence completion question. Let's take a look at the sentence. The payoff, okay, from the payoff from dash in education. Okay, dash in education is so dash and dash that it is almost dash as a predictor of economic change over a 5 to 10 year period. Okay, so this question, I would say the sentence itself is not very revealing in the sense that it doesn't give us too many clues. Okay, so we'll have to go by the combination of options that are provided. Yes, so what do we get? The payoff from expenditure in education. Okay, the payoff from productivity in education, I think, is one we can eliminate, right? So there cannot be a payoff from productivity in education is so small and erratic that it is almost useless. I would still say the remaining three words fit in, but we don't really talk about the payoff from productivity in education. Okay, so two can be eliminated. The payoff from expenditure in education or investment in education. Well, expenditure on education. We spend on something, right? We don't talk about expenditure in education. Yes. So grammar is something actually that can help us here. Therefore, we can eliminate options 1, okay, and 3. Okay, investment in education is a good word. Yes, is so slow and erratic that it is almost useless as a predictor of economic change over a 5 to 10 period. So this is a good set of words. Okay, what does 5 have? The payoff from investment in education is so slow and predictable. Okay, slow is one word. If it is so slow and it is predictable that it is almost irrelevant. Well, if it is predictable, then it should be relevant as a predictor of economic change. It cannot be irrelevant. Yes. So these two words contradict each other. Therefore, we don't take option. Next, we have another fill in the blank sentence completion question. The Lannisters had dash gold than the Tyrells. So we're making a comparison. Okay, until the Lannister army sacked Highgarden and took the Tyrell fortune to pay back the Iron Bank. On the other hand, the Northern army has dash than 10,000 men. Again, a comparison. And therefore, John needs to bend the knee to Daenerys. What happened in the story is next is dependent on George R. Martin, the writer of the series. For Dash, he has not written anything further, and we hope George R. Martin will get around to finishing the book Dash. But as it happens, book releases are as it happens, Dash book releases are delayed. Okay, so as you can see here, you have I'm going to focus on these three words: sometime, sometime, and sometimes. Okay, So you have the same three words in all the options. Okay, what is the difference between them, or what's the difference among them? Sometime, okay, means a period of time. This is not one word, it is a phrase. Okay, so some, adjective, and time. Okay, so we have the combination of a qualifier, yes, some time. Okay, a quantitative adjective. Sometime, one word. Okay, what does this mean? This means at some point. Okay, and then you have the word sometimes. This is again one word. Okay, but it ends in an s, and this means occasionally. Okay? Sometimes means occasionally. Okay, so essentially you'll have to look at the meanings and then accordingly fit the words into the blanks. Yes, but yes, we can also try with the first two blanks. You have less and few. Okay, what is the difference? Less is used for uncountable nouns and few is used for countable nouns. Okay, so we have gold. Right now, when you talk about gold, is gold a countable or an uncountable noun? It's an uncountable noun. Right, so we do not say fewer gold, we say less gold. Okay, so the first blank has to have less, so you're down to options 1 and 3. Okay, you can eliminate 2, 4, and 5. Okay, and then you have, on the other hand, the Northern Army has, now you're talking about men, which is a countable now. Okay, so that means you have to have fewer. Okay, that doesn't help us, so now we have to break it down to the remaining 3 blanks. Okay, what happens in the story next is dependent on George R. Martin, the writer of the series. For dash, he has not written anything further. So the meaning in this blank should be for a period of time. Okay, so that should be for some time. All right, so your answer here is option 1. Okay, so this is how you can do it. Right, for the next blank, we hope that George R. Martin will get around to finishing the book at some point. Okay, that will be sometime. Okay, and but as it happens, once in a while, occasionally, sometimes book releases are delayed. Okay, so we eliminate option 3 also. We have another grammar based question. Which of the following sentences contains correct and meaningful usage of the underlined words? The sentence is, Vikram's approach to the problem was unique from Harpreet's and he hadn't expected no criticism from her. Okay, so you can straight away eliminate option 1 because you do not say unique from. Right, unique is a superlative. Right, it is not used to make a comparison. It is the highest degree of comparison. Right, so there is no question of comparing it with something else, yes, or somebody else. Okay, so for that reason you can eliminate 1, you can also eliminate 4. Okay, unique from. Then there is another error in 1. The error is hadn't expected no criticism. Okay, hadn't is had not. Okay, which is already a negative, and then you have another negative. So you have what is known as a double negative. All right, so we do not use double negatives. Therefore, sentence 1, option 1 can be eliminated. Option 2 can be eliminated on the same basis, hadn't expected no. Okay, and then you have option 4, which has the same thing, hadn't expected. You're left with 3 and 5. Vikram's approach to the problem was different from Harpreet's, different from, not different than. Okay, you might find this used colloquially, again, different than, but it is incorrect. It should be different from. Okay, but he had expected no criticism from her. So sentence 3 is correct. Okay, why is 5 wrong? Approach to the problem was different from Harpreet's and he had expected. Okay, so look at the difference between but and. Okay, now the approach was different. All right, so you say and he expected. Well, if the approach was different, you would think that and he expected, you would think that he did expect criticism, right? But here there is actually a contradiction. The approach was different, but he expected no criticism from her. Even though they were different, he did not expect. Yes, that is the idea. So the and is incorrect in this context. You need a contradiction. Okay, we have here a poem. This poem is actually fairly easy. So if you don't like poetry, I would say this is a poem you can still more or less interpret because the questions break it down quite well. Okay, so let's start with the question itself. How are the words free will, fate, and will used in the poem above? Okay, so this is where you find the answers. It says dissolving the will. Okay, so look at that, dissolving the will. True freedom comes to those who have escaped the question of free will and fate. So basically, these are the three words. So he says, be foolish in love, he or she, because love is all there is. There is no way into presence except through love exchange. If someone asks, but what is love? The answer, dissolving the will, right? So doing away with the will here reference to the willpower. Okay. True freedom comes to those who have escaped the question of free will and fate. Okay, so how are the words free will, fate, and will used in the poem above? So if it is a question of what is love, if it is dissolving the will, and true freedom is, it comes to people who have escaped the question. So it is away from love. Yes. So you can answer all the three words are opposites of love. So you have option one. All right. Which of the following is the closest interpretation of lovers have some secrets that they keep? Now, this is the last line of the poem. Okay. Lovers have some secrets that they keep. You read these lines, okay, from here. Be clear like a mirror holding nothing. So you read the last few lines in an effort to understand. Okay. Be clear like a mirror holding nothing. Okay. So a mirror holding nothing will be clear. Be clean of pictures and the worry that comes with images. Be clean of it, clear your mind of it. Okay. Gaze into what is not ashamed or afraid of any truth. Contain all human faces in your own without any judgment of them. Be pure emptiness. Okay. Basically, he's talking about removing things, like keeping it empty, keeping it clear. Okay. What is inside of that, you ask? Silence is all I can say. Lovers have some secrets they keep. All right. So this actually basically says, okay, the secret is to have no secret. Yes, that is the answer. Because how can you get to this? Well, he's talking about clearing, cleaning, emptiness, nothing, right? So the idea. So when he says lovers have some secrets they keep, the secret basically is not having any secret. Clear it completely. This is definitely easy to do, right? So it says, according to the above paragraph, which of the following options will be true? This passage talks about the oceanic waves, where he says the size of oceanic waves is a function of the velocity of the wind and of fetch, the length of the surface of water subject to those winds. Stick to the words that are provided. If you are not comfortable with the information, right? Stick to the words that have been provided. Stick to the information that has been provided. Okay. The average impact of waves against a coastline is a function of the size of the waves and the shape of the sea bottom. The degree of erosion on coastline is a function of the average impact of waves and the geologic composition of the coastline. Okay, so what does this lead us to? This leads us to option 5, which says, okay, so as you can see, it is step by step. Okay, so the degree of erosion on the coastline, which is mentioned towards the end of the passage, is related to the shape of the sea bottom. It goes back to the previous line, right? The previous sentence. So essentially, that's what the passage is telling us, right? The fetch of the wind is related to the shape of the sea bottom. The size of this is a function of the velocity of the wind and of fetch. Okay. Look at what is connected to what. Yes. So here we don't have enough information to tell us that this is related to this. Yes. It doesn't tell us will not fluctuate far from average. Okay. The size of oceanic wave is correlated with the shape of the bottom. So again, there is no direct relation that is established between the two. Okay, and degree of erosion on coastline is not related, we don't know, right, with the velocity of, whereas there is a connection from this to this, there is a connection. Okay, this question is slightly tricky. Okay, so Indian religious and ethical space is different from that of Western countries. So you need to take note of this first sentence, that it is Indian religious and ethical, okay, morals, values, ideals. Okay, that space is different from that of the Western countries, right? So this is something that the author establishes at the beginning. Okay, goes on to tell us the Vedas, the Upanishads, etc., enrich Indian religious and social space. Okay, he says details of human values and dharmas, treatment of these things have a long tradition. They are often compared, contrasted, and debated by the characters in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. In the process, it has given birth to a tradition of dharma which has been transferred. Ethical discourse was not a one time affair. Okay? from time to time, religious leaders from various regions have nourished and strengthened, okay, nourished and strengthened the Indian ethical arena, okay. And then he gives us various examples of prominent religious leaders, okay. So, which of the following assumptions, please understand the question, which of the following assumptions will make the above paragraph redundant? Also, please understand what an assumption is. An assumption is the basis of an argument, right? So, again, it is what is known as an unstated premise. It is information that is taken as the basis of a conclusion or an opinion, but is not actually stated. Okay, so let's say if there were a certain assumption made, which one will make this particular passage redundant, invalid? All right. So this particular passage starts by saying Indian religious and ethical space is different from that of Western countries, goes on to explain how Indian religious and ethical space is. Yes. And in between does talk about how, briefly talk about how in the West it is different. The answer to this question is option 5, okay, which says Western ethical and religious space has a long tradition of treatment of human values and dharma, okay. So if it has a long tradition of treatment of human values and dharma, that means it is similar to the Indian tradition, right? So if that assumption is valid, yes, then definitely the given passage becomes invalid. All right, so that's why that is the answer. Okay, all religious leaders preach the same message and it is transferred from one generation to the next. Doesn't say whether it is religious leaders in the Indian or the Western tradition, so this will not necessarily make it redundant. Okay, Western religious spaces do not have details of treatment. This supports the passage. Ramayana and Mahabharata have made it possible for religious leaders to build the tradition is irrelevant in this case because it doesn't make the paragraph redundant either way. Okay, Western civilizations have been crossed, yes, by a different kind of religious leader is again supporting the passage. It doesn't contradict the passage. All right. Yes. So what do we have? Which of the following arguments is least likely to have a logical fallacy? Right. So the least likely, what is a logical fallacy? Fallacy is nothing but a flaw. Okay. So which one is the one with the least flaw? Yes. What is the argument we have? A manager seeks approval for conducting a training program on openness. He puts forward the following arguments in favor of the program to his CEO. Okay, so basically the 5 options that have been provided are ones that he uses in order to support this idea of conducting a training program on openness. Now, which is the one that has the, or which is the one that is least flawed? Okay, we did a pilot training program with a group of employees. Post the program, one of the participants was open to new ideas. Yes. So if one of the participants was open to new ideas, how many people? It is a group of employees. So out of a group, if only one was open, then that's not really enough to say that they should conduct a training program on openness. Okay. So option 1 doesn't work. Then this program should be good for our organization since it is designed by a leading consultant. Okay, fine. Maybe it is designed by a leading consultant. Does that make it a good program? Not necessarily, right? So a leading consultant is not enough to make a program completely valid. Okay. So this also is flawed. All right. Internal studies conducted across groups and locations showed that openness increases innovation. Now, this is not flawed because it is conducted across groups and locations. That means they have taken a good representative sample, right? And it showed that openness increases innovation, which is a good thing, right? So that's least flawed. We have only 2 options, only 2 options. We can either train on openness or suffer the consequences is very, very extreme. All right, so this is also flawed. If you really care about the organization, you should approve. Doesn't provide a reason, right? Really care about the organization, you should approve this training program. Okay, how is the training program going to help the organization? It doesn't provide any information. All right, so we have here a passage, yes, and the question says which of the above statements can definitely be interpreted based on the passage above. Yes, so here if you look at What does the passage tell us? Music probably does something interesting, explains neuropsychologist Catherine Loveday of the University of Westminster. It stimulates the brain in a very powerful way because of our emotional connection with it. Unlike brain games, playing an instrument is a rich and complex experience. This is because it's integrating information from senses like vision, hearing, and touch, along with fine moves. This can result in long lasting changes in the brain. This can also be applicable in the business world. Okay, so let's see which one can definitely be interpreted based on the passage above. Playing a musical instrument is a unique experience involving vision, hearing, and touch. Okay, so if it is a unique experience, yes, playing a musical instrument is a unique experience. Do we get that? Yes. It tells us, it makes a comparison between brain games and playing an instrument. Okay, it tells us it is a rich and complex experience, but does it tell us that it is a unique experience involving these things? It says it integrates information. All right, therefore, we cannot interpret statement one. Instrumental musicians are far more creative than vocalists. We don't have enough information. Okay, playing brain games does not integrate various senses and movements as much as playing a musical instrument. This we can definitely interpret because it says, unlike brain games, playing an instrument is a rich and complex experience. This is because it is integrating information from senses, such as senses like vision, hearing, and touch. Okay, so we definitely get statement three. Integrating the five senses is critical in the business world. We don't know. We know that playing an instrument helps to integrate information from various senses. But is it critical in the business world? We don't know, right? So, statement three only is the answer. We have another sentence completion question. Though he thought of himself as a or an dash person, his boss's abusive behavior. So, though is an indication of a contradiction. Okay, so he thought of himself as a certain kind of person, but his boss's abusive behavior made him talk back. So if his boss's abusive behavior made him talk back, he must be generally a person who doesn't get affected by different kinds of behavior, maybe a fairly calm person, right? So that's the kind of word you need in the first blank. However, okay, so again we have a contradiction. As he engaged in a or an dash with his boss, all he got in response was a or an dash, which only filled him with dash. Okay, so let's look at the first word. We have nonchalant, we have insouciant, we have philippique, envy, and nonchalant. So we eliminate options 3 and 4 because, first of all, we need an adjective there, and these two are nouns. What is a philippique? A philippique is a tirade or a bitterly condemning speech, right? Where a person just lets go of his emotions, in a bitter, angry way. Yes, so that's a philippique, and those two are nouns, so that they don't fit into the first blank. What is nonchalant? Nonchalant person is a casual person, someone who doesn't really show, concern, doesn't let himself get affected easily, right? So yes, a nonchalant person, an insouciant person could work. Let's look at the second one. His boss's abusive behavior made him talk back. However, as he engaged in a or an dash with his boss, so we know that because his boss's behavior is abusive, and he was sort of forced to engage in some sort of, not a discussion, most probably an argument, because though he thought of himself as a calm person, his boss's abusive behavior made him talk back. So talking back would imply an argument. So in the second blank, we need the word argument. So again, philippique wouldn't work there. So option 2 can be eliminated. Envy wouldn't work. So we eliminate option 5. Therefore, we are left with option 1. All right. So this is can be a tricky question, because if you don't know the meanings of these words, then it can be very, very difficult, because all the 4 words are fairly uncommon words. I won't say unfamiliar, because familiarity depends on you, but uncommon words. Remonstration is argument in this context. Philippique, as I said, is a long, bitter speech, and envy is boredom or weariness, right? So because, though as he engaged in an argument, he got a philippique, which is a tirade, and that made him feel bored. It made him feel tired, of the argument, because he's generally a person who doesn't get affected by things around. All right, so that's your answer.